Hello everyone, and welcome to this next episode of Kelly's Quest. Today I am so fortunate that I have Evan Urquhart with me here from Assigned Media. And when I say from Assigned Media, what I really want to say is the founder of Assigned Media. Assigned Media has been super busy keeping track of all of the current legislation that's going on in the nation, and they even went to the Supreme Court recently to hear what was happening with the state of Tennessee and transgender youth health care. So I'm very fortunate to have Evan here with us, and Evan, I want to thank you so much for taking this time out of your busy schedule to come to us, because I know as a fellow at MIT in their journalism department, if I'm correct, that your life is pretty hectic right now. So thank you so much for coming.
Well, it's fantastic to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I think what I first want to do is just kind of give everybody a background of what Assigned Media is.
Well, Assigned Media is a transgender news website. We publish most days on the weekdays. So the mission is sort of to be a check on the misinformation and propaganda that's going around related to trans issues, trans healthcare, trans rights, trans people in sports. And the reason that it exists is because so a couple of years ago in the summer of 2022, I noticed this explosion of misinformation about the transgender community in the right-wing media. Things that ranged from outright lies to, stories where the full context wasn't shared to, sort of half-truths or really misleading kind of semi-true sort of stuff. And, what I noticed was that the mainstream media wasn't doing a lot to sort of correct the record and to kind of check this and say, what's really going on. I pitched the idea of a reporter on this kind of trans fact-checking, trans misinformation beat to a couple of the publications that I had been freelancing for. And it was one of those things where, you get close, like there's interest, but no one said yes. And, after one interview where I felt like I had gotten particularly close and then it was a no, I was sort of, you kind of lay up at night, you're thinking like, I was so close, I wanted that so much, and the thought came into my head, I'm going to just do it myself. And so I founded my own website, launched in October. I think this job interview that didn't go well was like in August or September. By October, I had a website kind of stood up, and I've been going since then. So
a train of no's brought you to your own yes.
I mean, I'm just someone who is, to be a journalist, you have to be a stubborn person that it doesn't take no, that kind of keeps at something and keeps digging or keeps asking, or you just kind of have to have that sort of personality. So
now, did they ever give you reasons as to why that they weren't interested in it, or was it just a blanket, no, this is not something we're interested in, or did they explain to you why?
No, I think this is sort of why it ended up being something that I did myself, was because they were interested. Like, they thought it was a good idea. It was just, we don't quite have the time right now, or we don't have the funds, or we're going in a different direction. But it wasn't this is a bad idea, or we don't think anyone's interested in this. There was enough interest that I really thought that there was something there.
So you pitched it to several different organizations, and you said, I think I can do this on my own. And then did you just start writing, or did you lay out a formula, have a plan ahead of time about how to do this, or did you freelance for another organization first? Or so what was that initial bringing out to the world of Assigned Media?
So I had been a freelancer who was covering transgender issues, and I would say with a particular specialty in, medical, health, science kind of topics related to trans care since, since 2016 or so. So that was a sort of long-standing beat that I had been following on a freelance basis. And what I did when I decided I was going to create my own website was that I went around and kind of talked to journalists who I really respected.
Okay.
not necessarily people who had started their own news site, but people who were doing successful podcasts, or people who were, kind of working staff writers, people who were editors who were doing, stuff. And I just kind of talked with them, like, I have this idea. Do you think it's a good idea? And so through that process of conversation, I both tweaked the idea to make it more, specific and, actionable, and kind of narrow it into what I was going to do, and kind of narrow down that like focus on fact-checking propaganda, which the site actually does a little more than that now. But when we started out, it was just me and it was writing every single day, and it was fact-checking mostly.
So you would go out and search for misleading articles, which they aren't that hard to find. You just go search and there they are. A lot of misleading information about the trans community right now. And your first journal, online publication that you put out, how nervous were you about that? Or were you super excited? Was it more of a feeling of, yes, here we go? Or, oh my God, I hope that this doesn't bomb and I'm going to make it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a little bit in between the two. Closer to the second one, closer to being afraid of it bombing. I mean, I think, starting a new thing, the beginning is the hardest part. And I just really saw it as like, I'm just going to gauge some interest. I'm going to do this for 6 months. I'm going to see if anyone cares. Because, in theory, you want to do what you believe in regardless of what anyone thinks. But if the audience isn't there, it's just a sign that you're maybe not quite there yet. You haven't found the formula,
Right.
So there was a lot of interest, very, very quickly. I mean, I think I even had people who were signing up to be, paid subscribers within my first week, which
that is huge.
That's a strong sign that you're onto something.
So was there any marketing ahead of time to get this out to there, or was it just you talked to your friends and your family and you're like, hey, I'm putting this out, can you spread the word? Or was there like a planned marketing scheme for this?
I mean, all it was that I had maybe 5,000 followers on Twitter, which is not that many, but is not nothing. So I had a Twitter presence, and I had my previous freelance work, and I just told people what I was doing, and there was more interest than maybe anything that I'd done before.
I think you were right when you were saying you didn't know if this was what people were wanting to hear or not. Obviously, it's exactly what we were needing, because we're seeing, as a trans community, we're seeing the misinformation out there, and we're wanting our voices to be heard, and we don't know how to correct the misinformation, and you have tapped into a way to do that. And I think that that's a valuable resource, especially today in the current climate that we have in the United States with misinformation towards our community. On the way in this morning, I read that the state of Georgia has just passed a bill, or it's in the process of a bill being written, where they're going to strip trans health care for everyone out of their statewide health care program. And it's all based on misinformation. It's not based on any type of reality. And it feels like there's been this piling on and piling on and piling on of misinformation for our community for years, and nobody's been able to kind of break through with the beacon saying, here's the truth. And it seems to me like that's exactly what assigned media is doing. It's like, here's the truth, here's the misinformation, here's the truth, and here's why it's important to have that truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my real concern, my real fear was when I started to see some of the mainstream news publications, and God love them. I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt. So I am going to say that cisgender reporters who were new to the transgender beat were taken in by some very slick, very calculated, very well-funded people who, who have the resources to make whole kind of fake medical organizations, so they'll kind of stand something up and it sounds evidence-based. Oh, this has to be legitimate. And it's really just an advocacy group funded by the far right Christian kind of, people who we kind of all sort of recognize as political actors. But they're able to make it look very polished, and so I am going to say that that cisgender reporters are sometimes taken in by people who are activists who are pretending to be neutral and pretending to be interested in evidence, and kind of accidentally, let's say, wind up putting some of these, a sort of watered down version of some of this information and this misinformation into the mainstream. My long-running feud with the New York Times speaks to the fact that maybe they are not completely unaware of what is happening at this point, because we've done a lot of work to try and bring to their attention the way that some of these activist organizations operate. And so I would say might not be quite as innocent these days, because we have really worked to let them know that they've been played, and if they choose to keep, playing into that, I guess there's nothing we can do but tell the truth.
And didn't I recently see a headline from the New York Times saying the shameful attack on trans people or something like that? And my first thought was, boy, it'd been nice for this to have come out in 2016.
Yeah, or 2020 or 2022, or, I think 2023 was the year with the most anti-trans legislation. One of those years might have been good. I mean, we don't want to be too hard on people who are telling some of the truth now, but I did notice in that editorial that they sort of repeated some of the concerning lines about how legitimate questions remain about youth transgender healthcare. And there really aren't legitimate questions about youth transgender healthcare. It is extremely rare for a person under 18 to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. It is only, half, roughly, or fewer than half of the young people who are diagnosed with gender dysphoria end up having any kind of medical treatment at all. Most of those are older teens, not young younger children, and there are, carefully informed parental consent and doctors who are very alert to the possibility of, making a mistake through the whole process. So I don't agree with even that editorial that was supposedly, kind of on our side, saying that there are legitimate questions, but we're glad that they're noticing at all, I guess. I'm friends with so many parents of trans youth, and believe it or not, at one point I was a trans youth. Same.
Who would have thought that at all point all trans people were trans youth? Like, we grew up and I'm still trans. And I see these parents that are doing everything in their power to help their child survive and to thrive, what every parent wants their child to do. And it makes me always think back on my family, and the exact opposite happened with my family. My family thought the only way that I could thrive and survive was to squash it all, put it out of my mind, and they used the tactics of hell, they used the tactics of fear, they used the tactics of no one's going to love me. And all it did was it made me self-loathe. And so I had to go through a huge battle to just stop that self-loathing and to learn to love myself again for who I am. And I'm seeing these parents now being utterly terrified that their child, who they are doing the best that they can to help achieve their goal of thriving and surviving, having their parental rights stripped away from them. And when you went to the Supreme Court to listen in on the Supreme Court's case for where Tennessee recently had passed a law saying no more health care for trans youth statewide, period. End of discussion. And there were some very brave people that challenged that. And it made it to the Supreme Court. And would you like to share kind of the journey of how Assigned Media heard about this, how you all got down there to film this or report on it, and what was your take from it?
So, so first I do want to say I am so sorry that you went through that much difficulty with your family. I think when I think about my family, I just think they didn't know any of this. They didn't understand what was going. They were, concerned and doing their best, but I didn't have the kind of support that young trans people often and in a difficult, environment are having today. And so I do think that that working with parents, giving support to parents, giving a good source of information for parents has been really central to the work that I've been trying to do really from the beginning.
Thank you.
And, I interviewed a mom just last week, and we were talking about, the decision to move forward with medical care for her trans daughter. And she said, I had never seen my daughter happy before until the day when she came out to me. And, what a powerful experience for a parent to say, I just saw my child happy for the first time. And so when parents are in these situations, it just seems self-evident to them that they need to support that child and help that child thrive, because when you're actually living in the life of a child who has gender dysphoria and you're seeing how powerful it is just to use a pronoun or to let them wear the clothes that they're comfortable with, they're not agonizing over, is this right, because they can see the results for those children. And so I think because of our sort of long history of covering the truth about transgender healthcare and having relationships with families who are in these situations, when the gender affirming care bans, became a Supreme Court case, it was always really clear to me that I wanted to cover that. And the fellowship that I'm doing, which is the Knight Science Journalism Fellowship at MIT, is actually giving me a chance to sort of closely follow this Supreme Court case. It's called U.S. versus Skermeti, over this whole 9 months. And you asked about the trip to D.C. What happened was that Donald Trump was elected. And when Donald Trump was elected, it really kind of lit a fire under me. I think for a lot of people, it was a moment of sort of shock and fear and what do we do? And I just had this really strong, we need to do more. We need to step up. We need to be a transgender news site, as much and more than we have ever been. And so I knew that this Supreme Court case was coming. I knew that I was kind of intending to go and cover it, but it was after Trump won that I said, I want to go down there. I want to take a photographer. I want to take a person on the street reporter, so that while I'm in the courtroom where there can't be photos or video, I can have people outside who are telling the stories of the trans people and their allies and parents of trans kids who came to demonstrate in front of the court. So we did that. We went to DC. I went inside. I got to hear the whole, all the oral arguments, and we brought trans stories and a real focus on the community, sort of reflecting that back to people and trying to give people some hope and some belief that, people are fighting for them.
That is hope. I'm glad you brought up that word hope, because that's one of the things that has been my focus lately is hope. I know for a fact that trans people have always been here. We always will be here. There's you can't eradicate us, because as long as people are giving birth to children, trans people are being born.
Of course.
That's just the reality of it. And Chase Strangio was the lawyer that was working to support the parents in this situation. Did you get to meet with him or speak with him at all?
I didn't. I think I may get to speak with him later. He was very booked up, and we had our trip. Our whole trip came together very close. They said if we'd asked a little earlier, they might have been able to get us in, but he was too booked. But yeah, he was the first trans person to argue before the Supreme Court. He's just a towering figure. He's fighting so hard for trans rights. And I know the ACLU has not been sleeping on some of these executive orders and some of these new cases too. They've been very active in trying to get the courts involved. I would say, I really do believe in hope, but I don't believe in giving people false hope. I don't think that most people don't expect the Supreme Court to stand up for the principle that evidence-based treatment can't be banned by a state legislature for no reason, which I think it is more concerning than I think most people have realized. Like, I think that people haven't really made the leap yet that I've made sort of over this period of studying this case, which is, if they can ban transgender healthcare, why can't they ban vaccines? There's no reason. If they can ban transgender healthcare, why can't they ban ADHD meds? There's no reason. Like, the law does not say anything that distinguishes trans healthcare. And this has sort of been my whole project has been, transgender healthcare is not different from other kinds of healthcare. There is not some clear, bright line between trans healthcare and other healthcare. And if the Supreme Court is going to let states ban it on pretenses and lies and just false crap, there's no kind of reason why they couldn't do that for anything.
And I think that's one of the reasons that I'm originally from East Tennessee, from a small town of about 10,000 people there. And in 2014, I finally had the wake-up call that I need to be in a state that has protections for me. And it feels like right now what I'm noticing is people are starting to slowly think about, this might not go the way it should go. Just because it's the right thing to do doesn't mean they're going to do it. Yeah. And they're starting to think, where should I go? What are some states that I should go to? Where are some places in this country that are safe? Should I consider moving out of this country at this point? And so there's all of these factors that are in play. And when I moved to Massachusetts in 2016, I moved 2014, I apologize. I moved 950 miles to get away from what I saw as oppression and false information towards my community, and I came up here. In 2018, I ended up having to fight tooth and nail to hang on to my rights in this very state because they passed the law saying, you can't kick me out of a bathroom, you can't kick me out of a restaurant, you can't, I have access to public places just like everybody else does. And some people weren't happy with that. So they went and they got a ballot measure put in place where the electorate, the people of Massachusetts got to vote on whether or not I got to have equal access to public spaces. And for the first time in my life, I became very politically involved.
That'll do it.
Yeah, and it wasn't something I wanted to do at the time, but as I started doing it, I understood that people are desperate to hear our voices. Because everybody says, I don't know anyone trans. Well, you don't know that. Because I could walk down the street and you would just walk right by me or whatever. And I ended up talking at public access television stations. I ended up talking to news reporters, NPR, places like this to just tell my story. And what I'm learning is places like ActonTV, Bill Ricka TV are so important to helping us get out this information, this truth of information that we're here. We don't want to do anything other than live our lives and be as healthy as we possibly can. And part of that is I need gender-affirming care. And that move from Tennessee to Massachusetts, now in my brain it feels like, do I have to move again? And have you considered moving to, like, I know you originally were not, you're Massachusetts born. You moved away and you've lived, like, you even lived in East Tennessee at Fort Sanders, which is the little area of Knoxville that people that go to the University of Tennessee stay at. And you've come back to Massachusetts now for your fellowship. Are you considering staying here now, or are you considering moving off into other areas? That's a lot, I know.
No, not at all. So yeah, I need to shout out, I am originally from Bedford, Mass. Billerica is, I was right over the border from Billerica in Bedford, actually. So, you know, I'm from here originally, and I love to be here. I was most recently, before I got my fellowship, I was in Virginia, in the Charlottesville area. And then, you know, I was kind of looking for a way to get back to Massachusetts. But I do think that with the current federal administration, I am definitely thinking about staying in Massachusetts, at least for the next few years. Massachusetts is actually, and I wrote down some stuff to make sure we get it right. Yeah, so Massachusetts is one of the safest states to be in for a trans person, largely down to the SHIELD law in 2022. And this was a law that was passed in the wake of the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs, which allowed states to ban abortions, and it protects providers who provide either abortion care or gender-affirming care from being sued or accused of a crime in another state. So Massachusetts will not participate in or hand over or extradite any healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, etc., who are providing healthcare that is banned in another state, which means we are very likely to retain access to gender-affirming care in Massachusetts. And even people who come from other states and get that care in Massachusetts, those providers are generally protected. It doesn't necessarily protect if a person from Massachusetts was to go to another state and provide care, then they'd be in another state. But if they're in Massachusetts providing care, they are protected by Massachusetts law. So, you know, I am also thinking a little bit about leaving the country because the federal government, what is it? We're mid-February, so it's less than a month, is it, that the Trump administration has been in power, and they have just done absolutely sweeping attempts to target the community. And, you know, there's a lot of concern that those will go even further if they're not pushed back. And, you know, I'm also a public figure. I'm a journalist. You know, there's a concern about the use of obscenity laws. So, I mean, people may have heard of Project 2025. Project 2025 set out the plan to, you know, define any sort of mention of transgender issues at all as obscenity. And then it has, I believe, a line that says something like, you know, so transgender ideology is pornography, and pornographers should be jailed. So, you know, I'm not saying they're going to be able to do that, but it is certainly a desire to do that to someone like me who has a, you know, trans news site that is, I think, it is something that you shouldn't panic about, but it is something that you shouldn't also completely dismiss. So I have looked a little bit at possibility of leaving the country. I am not interested in leaving the country. I'm in no rush, but just seeing it as like, well, if even Massachusetts wasn't safe, if there was an effort to even come into blue states by the federal government, let's just maybe have a plan C or D for that like really bad scenario. But I do think that for most people, Massachusetts is safe and probably will continue to be safe. I do think if you're really putting your neck up there and really drawing the attention on a kind of national scale, maybe a little less so. But
I feel like that we have to put our yeah, I want to go hide under a rock until it's all over with, but I also understand how important it is to have your voice on my show to let the people know this is what's happening and this is where we're at, and this is also part of the plan, I feel like, it by the Trump administration is to put fear into us to even speak out whatsoever. And they're hoping that if they intimidate us enough, if they scare us enough, we'll on our own detransition.
Yeah, I mean, that's not happening, and they're fools to think that it's possible. And, you know, I think they're fools to think that we're a community that can be pushed around easily. Because contrary to this kind of nonsense, this idea, this fantasy in their head that coming out as trans meant you were just feted and applauded and everyone was, you know, sort of congratulating you all the time, you know, certainly there is occasional people who will say you're brave or I support you, but it's really hard to be trans. It's really hard to come out as trans. And so the people who have done that are not people who go quietly or easily or back down. And I think that, so I think there's been a miscalculation. And I really do think that I think that often trans people underestimate how much cisgender people in the mainstream like that about us. They like that we are willing to be ourselves. They like that we are individualists, that we go against the grain. And I think there's something in the American spirit that really resonates with someone who is their own person and not willing to conform. And so I actually do see the trans community as having a role in rallying people against this attempt to sort of get everyone to be afraid and conforming and changing all of their values overnight. And suddenly we can't say DEI. Suddenly we can't have trans on our websites. Like, I don't think people are going to like that much. And I think that there's power in being a community that says, no, we're not doing that.
No, I couldn't do it. Like, I am so out. Like at where I work, I am out.
Sure.
Like my coworkers know I'm known. And we're talking about this being our own authentic self, and I think people do admire authenticity. And for me, I will always remember the first time I affirmed my authentic self was in 1994.
You got me beat by quite a while.
Well, the story is kind of strange. So in 94, I started hormones. I started living as my authentic self. In 95, I was on hormones for a year, and I lost my job, I lost my family, I lost everything, and I detransitioned. So from 1996 until 2003, I pretended to be a man again. And that time of detransition, for me, was not because I thought, oh my God, I am not trans. That not once did that ever cross my mind that I am not trans. What crossed my mind was, if I try hard enough, if I try desperately enough, I cannot let the world know that I'm trans anymore, and I can keep it a secret from the world. But what I found out was, even from that time, was from 96 to 2003, my authentic self would leak out all the time. Like, I couldn't keep it hidden away. So in 2003, I'm like, you know, this is stupid. I'm miserable. So what I did was I started hating myself again for detransitioning, and then I'm like, okay, enough of that. I'm going to affirm my authentic self and not look back. And so I started the hormones. I went through all of the things that thank you, science. Thank you, doctors. Thank you, the medical profession, for providing the care and service that I needed to affirm my authentic self. And I've never looked back. And I think people are using this concept of detransition against us right now. Like, oh, it was a mistake, you're not really trans, when in fact, for me, I can't speak for anybody else that's detransitioned because I've never spoken to anyone else that's detransitioned but myself. I detransitioned because of fear. I also learned that I didn't know how to cope not being my authentic self. So I was caught in this world of damned if you do and damned if you don't, and I'm like, well, I'm going to go be my authentic self, and whatever happens, happens. So in 2003, I reaffirmed my authentic self. And then in 2005, 14, I moved up here to Massachusetts, and I'm like, ta-da, world, here I am. I am in my place. And I have blossomed. So I keep seeing the right use people that have detransitioned as a weapon against our community. Do you have any insight or thoughts on how they've recruited our community to help with that? Or do you know any, would you like to share that? Or is there any thoughts at all?
Yeah, no, a detransition is one of the topics that I have covered in my journalism pretty extensively. So what you need to understand about the political use of detransition is that it is, when I say a very small group of people, like I mean a handful of people, a dozen people maybe 20 who are both people who have detransitioned, so who, underwent a medical transition and are now identifying with and living as, members of their birth sex, but also who are people who are bought into this project of, of eliminating healthcare for all trans people and claiming that trans people don't exist. Now, there are, again, a dozen people, maybe 20 at most, who are fitting that bill, and they fly them across the country. They fly them to state after state. The same people, Chloe Cole, Prisha Mosley, Walt Heyer, a couple of people, testify at every single hearing on gender-affirming care bans. It's all, that person again, because, usually they can't find anyone from the entire state who has detransitioned who's willing to testify for a gender-affirming care ban bill. So they have to fly in these detransitioners. So that's one type of detransitioner, and they are so individual that you could just tell their individual stories instead of describing them as a group. There is another group that is also a fairly small group, but trans people are also a fairly small group, of people who started to transition and found some part of it wasn't right for them. Some are people who had a story a little bit like yours, where it was the social pressure and the fear that really sort of forced them to abandon, sort of the hope of living an authentic life. And these are people who often hope to transition again. There are also, I think, people who felt a sort of pressure to be just a man or just a woman, and who, after they kind of tried to be, they first tried to be one, and then they tried to be the other, and then they found that the truth was maybe more something in between. And so they may have stopped hormone therapy, but be very happy that they had a surgery, or they may, be on a very low dose of hormone therapy, or they may just, want a they, them pronoun. And in those cases, these are often people who still identify as trans. They identify as a detransitioner because they have, sort of reversed a medical step, but they're still part of our community.
Right.
They're supportive of our community. They, I think there was one of the gender-affirming care ban bills actually managed to get more detransitioners to sign a letter opposed to the ban than there were detransitioners who were supporting it. And some of these people have had bad medical experiences. Some of these people have had just a change in how they see themselves, and all of those people are people who can be supported and celebrated. And again, they are also a very small percentage of trans people. Like, this is not a common experience if you medically transition, but there's no kind of medical care that has an 100% success rate. And I think this is when I talk about misinformation, this idea of if there's 1% or 5% that the treatment doesn't work for, then that invalidates the treatment, doesn't exist in any other medicine. If you think about your own medical care, was there ever a time when you saw a doctor and they tried one medication and then they said, oh, this isn't working for you, let's try another? Like, that's almost anyone who has had medical care will have that experience. And it is only with transgender healthcare where it's presented as, oh, well, then we just need to wrap the whole thing up because it works for 95% of the people, but for 5% it doesn't work that well. Like, that's bizarre. This is where I do get angry at some of the mainstream media for, I just think, not helping people to understand what is going on. Because what is going on is that very normal aspects of healthcare, transgender healthcare has an extraordinarily low regret rate compared to other healthcare. That's the truth. Like, those are the facts. And so to present that as, well, something is going terribly wrong, or we have big questions about whether this care is appropriate, like, it just isn't, it isn't reality-based. It isn't evidence-based. It's just a lot of nonsense that's being pushed by political actors who are trying to get these bans. And why are they trying to get these bans? I think that's often the next question. And it's because the Christian right tried to make a wedge issue out of same-sex marriage, and they lost badly, and then they regrouped and decided that trans people were going to be the next target. You can go into the history. I reported on the first evangelical Christian conference on what they called transgender confusion. That was in 2015. So roughly 2015, they kind of decided, okay, trans people are going to be our next target, and then they sort of marched in this implacable and, like, I would say now, like, very scary manner to, like, this moment where all of a sudden we're being literally erased from the history books and, and, like, openly persecuted. And it's not going to be forever, but things are going to be hard, I think, for a little while, and very hard maybe for quite a while in red states.
Speaking of red states, can you give me a kind of an overview of what are some of the things that are going on in some of the red states currently that we need to be made aware of? And I want my home to be a safe haven for some people. So if I wanted to figure out a way to help some person that's in a red state get out of that red state and make it to Massachusetts, are there connections that I, as an adult who has a home that would like to help them? Or there some connections that I need to make to be able to help these people get out of these states if they so choose?
Yeah, there are definitely groups, and I didn't prepare notes for them, so I
Okay.
feel like Trans Refuge is one. I feel like there's one that has Haven in the name, but definitely look them up. There are people who are trying to provide resources to help transgender people leave the state. There are resources that are trying to help trans people leave the country. And I also think it's very important not to be in a blue state and just think the only thing we can do is get people in red states out, because organizing in red states is actually quite strong. There is actually a lot of mutual aid and support groups and support networks that exist in these red states that, dare I say, we could learn from in blue states where we're maybe not used to being under a hostile environment, where there's a lot of danger in organizing and a lot of kind of risk that we take when we have to try to come together and stand up for our rights. So yeah, I would really encourage people to also look at supporting some of the organizing going on for queer and trans issues in red states, because those people are doing the work. They are working very hard to try to protect and make space for those communities. So yes, get people out, but also don't necessarily assume you're completely safe in a blue state, and also look to organizing in red states for how do you move forward when you're in hostile territory.
I always think of Tennessee as this interesting conglomeration of ideology, which I'm assuming every state is. And I know that civil rights in Tennessee were always a huge push for it. And there's institutions down there in small towns that have been fighting for civil rights for years and years and years. The school that I went to was one of the first schools in the South to be integrated. And Edward R. Murrow went there and did an entire story on Clinton and the law about what this integration looked like. And wouldn't you know it, it's integrated. So it's things do happen. You're right. I guess look to help the people that are fighting. Look to help the people that are like, I need to take a break, help me get out of here, and figure out a way to make sure it doesn't come to us.
Yeah, yeah. You know, how do I say? I really met some incredible people when I was in Tennessee. There are very good people in these red states. Now, I also felt like I was sort of looked at differently on the street for the first time in my life. I grew up in Massachusetts. I was sort of a butch woman presenting person at the time. I was, there were every other person in Cambridge, Mass. looked like me. And then I moved to Tennessee, and all of a sudden there's this tension and this sideways glances and this kind of rudeness, and you're never quite sure, is it because of how I look, or is this person just having a bad day? Or, it was different, and I didn't like that. But the people who I met lifelong friends when I was in Tennessee, and people who would show up for me in ways that were really remarkable. So, there's good people all over the country. We need to join up with them and ask them what they need and be part of these kind of larger networks of care and support, I think. Yeah.
I'm going to be sitting down with Marissa Richmond from Tennessee, an openly trans woman
Wonderful.
From Nashville who is a historian. And when I was a trans baby, she was already out there pounding the pavement, doing the thing that needed to be done to make sure that I could come into my own in the state. And she's one of my idols because she created the game plan almost based on, she got her game plan from somebody. That person that she got her game plan from, they got their game plan from somebody. So I'm hoping now to get a game plan from Marissa to make sure that Massachusetts stays Massachusetts. I know in 2018 we fought tooth and nail to make sure that we kept our rights here. And I think you're correct when you say that we can learn from them, because it's one thing to be up here and saying, oh, look at Tennessee, look at Georgia, look at Alabama. I'm glad I'm in Massachusetts. Well, we're still in the United States.
Yeah.
And we're still part of this country, and we've got to make sure that it doesn't become individual states' rights to determine where you can live safely or not.
Yeah, I mean, I do think so. I think you asked about the different laws, and so there are, bathroom bans that are have been attempted to be federalized. I believe there is sort of a bathroom ban on the books for federal property now. There are, I think they're attempting to come after the funding of hospitals and of public schools across the country, so not just in red states. They're trying to, attack the federal funding of schools that are supportive of trans youth. They're trying to attack the funding of hospitals that provide gender-affirming care. So there are ways that they are trying to creep into blue states that are, very likely illegal, but unfortunately, there is also perhaps an appetite for defying the law that we haven't necessarily seen in a presidency before. So yeah, and we're two white people. We need to look to, you talked about the history of civil rights. Like, there are people in this country who know how to organize under the most brutal and repressive environments imaginable. And we need to be, I think, humble and willing to learn from people with those experiences, particularly in the Black community, but in all kinds of communities. Yep. Because if we've been pretty comfortable, if we've, been sitting kind of pretty, we might not know the type of determination and the type of organization that can work when the climate gets pretty rough.
So, Evan, that was a lot. I mean, and this has been a pretty heavy episode for people, but I want to kind of ask you, on your journey throughout the country, and we'll kind of wrap up with this, you have met some amazing people. I'm sure you've talked with some amazing people. You've talked with a parent the other day of a trans youth. You were saying, what are some of the stories that have stuck with you that you're like, oh, yes, I needed to hear this story right now. Is there any of them that you would like to share with people to kind of finish the episode?
Absolutely. I mean, I was really impressed by the organizing that happened to push back against what I was just talking about, which was those that executive order that tried to shut off gender-affirming care for youth, including in blue states. And we saw some very concerning things. We saw hospitals in New York and in other blue states that were supposed to be protected starting to say, well, we're not going to offer this care anymore. We won't take any new patients. And people showed up and they demonstrated in front of hospitals. I'm going to tell you, I was on some group chats where people were a little nervous. They said, you can't demonstrate at a hospital. They'll think you're monsters. They'll think you're evil. You can't go and demonstrate in front of a hospital. And people said, no, we're going to demonstrate in front of hospitals because they can't abandon their patients. And we are not going to let them get away with abandoning their patients. And I think the New York Attorney General said, we'll come after you for breaking the law because we have non-discrimination ordinances where you have to provide this care. So, if you're afraid of getting sued, you better be afraid of getting sued by the state of New York. And so hospitals have started to reverse those decisions and to offer that care again. And I do think that on a broader scale, so there's the narrow hope, which I feel people are fighting back and they're fighting back successfully, and that gives me a lot of hope. But I also think that what we talked about earlier about the ways that the individuality of trans people can really inspire people, there's an opportunity for us not just to be, fighting for our own rights, but to be inspiring the public and inspiring them with, this is what it looks like when you keep the faith. This is what it looks like when you don't just go quietly. We're not going to let these people get away with taking away our rights, taking away our democracy, and trans people can be at the head of that movement, not just begging for, please don't forget us in this movement. And that's what I see as our hope and our strength is we don't have to be begging cis people to protect our rights. We can be inspiring cis people to protect our rights and their own rights because it's all the same fight.
It's huge to be able to know that on a personal level and on a national level and everything in between that things are happening.
Absolutely.
And I think you're right that we can learn so much from the Black community and from other communities that have been fighting this fight. Worcester just recently became a safe haven city for trans people. And they didn't have to do that, but they did it. So there's these local communities that are doing things on a community-wide basis. But for me, I think one of the most empowering things that I've gotten to witness over the last year is going to a family's Christmas party and watching their trans daughter, who I've known since she is itty bitty, like she is no bigger than a minute, and now she's as tall as I am. She's grown up into this amazing young woman. And the whole time we were at this party, nothing about trans ever came up. She wanted to play chess. She wanted to go beat people at other games. She wanted to be a kid and sing songs. She got tired of the adults and wanted to go hang out with her girlfriends. One day she's trying to be a fencer or a sword fighter, I call it. She gets mad when I say that because I'm not a sword fighter. I'm a fencer. I use the epi. But now she's into other sports. She's into chess. She's into soccer. She's getting to explore all of these different aspects of what it means to be a middle school kid. And for me, that's the dream. She doesn't have to focus on the other stuff. She gets to focus on being that obnoxious little middle school kid that everybody loves dearly. And so I think that that's where I see my hope is in the trans youth who are out there living their best lives.
Absolutely. Couldn't have put it better myself.
Evan, thank you so much for being on the show with me. This has been an absolute pleasure. And people out there, thank you for tuning in. Like I said, there'll be more episodes as we go along. But Evan, this one has been a highlight for me. I've learned so much from you. And thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with me. And everybody, go out there, share kindness, be good to one another. And if you need to get a little bit dirty fighting the good fight, go get a little bit dirty fighting the good fight. Thank you. Bye.